Hey, it's Scott Duffy Bonsai. Today we're taking a look at the Nikon Z50. Thanks to Cameracraft in Rockford, Illinois for letting me try this out at their shop. I'll be comparing this to the Canon EOS M5. It has a few similar features, mostly physically, like the flip down screen, but we're going to look at those two cameras together in this video. This is the first APS-C mirrorless camera in the Z-mount. That means it has a smaller sensor than the full-frame Z6 and Z7. I'm not going to go into specs too much, you can look those up easily, but basically it has around 21 megapixels. There is no in-body stabilization in the Z50. With the M5 that I have here as comparison, it also does not have in-body image stabilization. Definitely has a solid feeling body, nice materials, the grip is substantial. I think this is the best grip that I've used for an APS-C mirrorless camera so far. I'm liking how the controls are laid out. You have the two dials for adjusting settings of whatever mode you're in. So if you're in manual mode, you'll use the front dial and the top dial to adjust two different settings. And then there's an ISO button to adjust ISO itself. With Nikon, you hold that button down and then you use one of the dials to adjust ISO. The main mode dial on the Z50 does not have any type of lock to it. On the M5, it actually does have a lock, which is convenient in some situations, but it is also harder to change. One of the nicest physical features of the Nikon cameras with the Z6, Z7, and this Z50 is that the viewfinder comes out quite a bit from the back of the camera, so that gives you a nice eye relief. It works well with photography up to your face with the viewfinder. The viewfinder itself is around 2.3 million pixels, which is actually very similar to the M5, but I think the view in the Z50 is larger, seems a little bit better in my opinion for the viewfinder. On the bottom of the camera you have the tripod socket. It's in a nice position. Also the battery door is far to the side so that you shouldn't have any issues with quick release plates. The battery door itself doesn't have any type of spring to it, so it does flop around if you open it up. I don't see any type of weather seal around that battery door. There is a new battery for this camera. It's the ENEL25 battery. It has around 1100 milliamp hours. It's on the pretty average side with how much battery power it has. Actually, the M5 is very similar in that case. Considering these aren't my cameras that I try out, I have no way of testing the battery capacity on my own, so it is rated around 300 photos per charge and around 75 minutes of video per charge. Next to the battery, there's the SD card slot. It's a little challenging to get to the card itself, but I think it's better than the A6100 that I had used previously. On the M5, it is also near the battery, but it's slightly easier to access. The one negative of the M5 is the battery door is so long that if you want to use quick release plates with tripods, that doesn't work too well on the M5, but with the Z50, definitely a nice setup there. You have a lot of standard ports on the camera, HDMI, USB, you can charge through the USB, which is very nice. Also, you have a mic port, that's very good for any type of video stuff you want to do. With the M5, it also has a mic port. One difference with ports on the M5 and Z50 is that the M5 has a dedicated port for a cable release. Now with the Z50 you can get an accessory to do wireless Bluetooth connectivity with the shutter and all of that, so there is at least an option. The Z50 has a touchscreen, it flips down 180 degrees to face the lens. The M5 is exactly the same in that case. Now there are some challenges to this design. Vlogging works nicely if you're doing it handheld, but any type of situation where you want to film yourself and put it on a tripod, you'll need some type of bracket system. It is a very unusual design, but sometimes it does work out decently well. The touch implementation on both cameras is very nice. The Z50, you got full touch with the interface, with touch to focus. You can go through your photos and zoom in, zoom out on them, adjust settings. It has a very nice touch interface to the Z50. The same thing with the M5. On the Z50, you can switch between photo and video with a top switch next to the mode dial. Z50 has a built-in flash that's nice to have if you are into that. Of course, the M5 also has a built-in flash. Let's take a quick look at the size difference between the Z-mount and the EF-M mount. You can see it's definitely a much larger diameter for the Z-mount, so there are some benefits and negatives. If you want a very compact camera, that is a challenge for the Z-mount. However, you can see that the Z50 is definitely very small for what it is compared to the M5. As I mentioned before, there is a front dial and a top dial to adjust settings as you would like. So if you're in aperture priority, you use one of those dials. If you're in manual, you can use one for aperture, one for shutter speed, and then you've got your ISO with a button. Of course, one of the nicest features of a camera of this level are the custom modes. On the Nikon, it's U1 and U2. Basically, you can push whatever settings you want into those and you'll be able to get back to those settings instantly. I really like that feature. With the Nikon, you have an I button that allows you to access some features faster than you would if you were going through the menu itself. So you're definitely going to be using that I button a lot with this camera. On the Z50's touchscreen, you actually have 3 dedicated buttons that are part of the screen itself: zoom in, zoom out, and display. I think that's a great setup, and it's very logical from a control standpoint and interface standpoint to have those 3 buttons associated with the screen itself. So it does use the actual touchscreen technology to make those buttons work. I think it's a really interesting setup, and I like how they designed that. The Z50 has a dedicated button that allows you to switch between the viewfinder and the back screen. There is, of course, the standard sensor on there that you can do it automatically, but it is nice to have a button as well. The Z50 has a button that allows you to adjust exposure compensation. You can hold that button down and use one of the dials to adjust it. With the M5, it has a dedicated dial for exposure compensation, but I think in some situations the Nikon setup is better. There is an FN1 and FN2 button near the mount on the Z50. It's nice to have. You can adjust those how you would like. In my limited testing so far, the Z50's autofocus feels very quick. I didn't notice any issues with it. Now when we get to tracking, it works like their older DSLRs in live view still. Use the OK button to lock on and lock off of targets. So you can select something on the screen or use the OK button to give you a selectable box to move around the screen. You pick an object on the screen, lock on, and then the camera will follow that. When I was testing the tracking, it did lock on nicely. It kept on the subject for the most part. I would even move it off screen and then move it back on the screen, and it would track that object still some of the time. So I do think tracking will be pretty decent on the Z50. There are various autofocus modes on the camera. I didn't try them all out, but I did use the pinpoint autofocus most of the time. It gives a very small point of focus, which is nice. I like that fine grain autofocus control. Worked just fine. No issues with that pinpoint autofocus. One of the nice features that really helps out aperture priority in similar setups is having a minimum shutter speed. So in the Z50, that feature is in there. When you set auto ISO, you can set a minimum shutter speed. Very nice feature to have. The M5 actually does not have that, and it's pretty frustrating. Your subjects are moving pretty quick. You can dial that in as you would like, but still use an easier, simpler mode so you can focus on composition and other aspects of photography. There are a bunch of creative filters on the Z50. I really didn't try them out too much. Just know that they're in there if you're into that sort of thing. The Z50 does not have any in-body stabilization in the camera, but it does have an electronic stabilizer for video. Also, the optical VR, when the lens has it, has a few settings as well. One nice quality of life feature with photography that I noticed in the Z50 is that you can adjust it to where when you take a photo, it'll normally just show you the photo itself in a review mode. When you press the shutter button or something, and it'll go back to the live view. So you can actually adjust this to not have that happen in the viewfinder, but still have it happen in the back screen. The camera has auto exposure bracketing for 5 photos maximum, plus or minus 3 stops. It has a multiple exposure overlay feature with various types of overlays. Haven't tried it out, but it's in there if you're interested. Also has an interval timer. Time-lapse movie mode, and silent photography. I did do some sample videos for the Z50, let's check those out. The Z50 is very featured with video. You have 4K, 30, 24, and all that. You can do slow motion with 120 frames a second, or have the camera itself slow down the footage. I did do a test with the slow motion video. I used the option where the camera makes that slow motion clip. You can see how much time goes between pressing the spray bottle and the liquid coming out of there. Really interesting to see slow motion like that where it comes right from the camera. It's a super convenient way to make those clips. The main reason I'm looking at the Z50 and the M5 together is that flip down screen. I wanted to do a vlogging test with those two just to see how they turned out together. I had all of the stabilization settings on both cameras, so electronic VR. Did the vlogging test. The first vlogging test, full manual settings, nothing that the camera could change. and for the second test I did auto ISO, but besides that all the settings were manual and the same. Of course I used the standard kit lenses on both cameras. Of course, I did take sample photos with the Z50. Let's check those out. We're going to look at a full view of each photo and then 100% crop of somewhere in the photo. I also took a few sample photos of the M5 and Z50 together. Let's check those out. One important aspect of a camera are lenses. So with the Z50, there are a ton of native lens options, especially with APS-C. You've got the two different kit lenses, the 16-50 3.5 to 5.6 VR, and also the 50-250 at 4.5 to 6.3 VR. I had both lenses. I really didn't try the telephoto out too much. Now here's a little quick comparison with the M5 kit lens and the Z50 kit lens. You can see the head diameter again of the lens, how big of a difference it is. These APS-C Z-mount lenses have a lock setup to them, so they do compact. You can rotate the lens a little bit, unlocks, and then it'll be ready to use. With the Z50, of course, you can adapt f-mount lenses. That's all of the film era, DSLR era. So the G-type lenses, I really like the f1.8 primes for f-mount, but you'll need the adapter, of course. With the f-mount adapter, you can adjust the aperture, which is good, but you can't use lenses in autofocus that don't have a motor inside. I actually had one of those older film era lenses, tried it out with the Z50. It worked just fine with the aperture. I was able to adjust it through the camera. Of course, I was doing manual focus with that lens, but there is peaking inside the Z50, so you will definitely have some benefits with manual lenses on that camera. If you don't know what peaking is, it's basically a feature to help you focus. So you can use the full frame Z-mount lenses on the camera, of course. There are some options. You got the 50 1.8. There is a 35mm f1.8, and that's getting up there in price, but it is an option. It'll give you that 50mm equivalent look to the photos. Looking at the roadmap, there's going to be a 28 and a 40mm that are not S lenses, so I can expect those to be a decent option for the Z50. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about my personal opinion with the Z50, basically some of the positives and negatives. First off, I'm going to go with the negatives. There is no wired cable release. I think this camera is very good for photographers, so it's too bad that they didn't put that physical port in the camera. The autofocus tracking on the camera is a little fumbly. You have to use the OK button. It works nicely from my experience so far, but just consider that if you're doing a lot of action sports tracking with the camera. The flip down 180-degree screen is an awkward design. I have it on the M5 and it has definitely some negatives to it, especially when you're trying to mount it on something and have the screen face forward. There is no in-camera shake reduction. I think that was a big missed feature for the Z50. I really do think it would have given the Z50 a leg up. They could use full frame lenses with it and have a really amazing stabilizing system. I think in the future we'll probably see that, but who knows. Really doesn't make sense to me that Nikon's trying to compete on size with the Z50. They have a really large mount. I think they could have done some things to improve the camera and sacrificed a little bit of the size. In relation to that, the battery is a big sticking point for me personally. I think they really should have tried to go with the battery they use in the Z6 and Z7 and some of their DSLRs. Would have been better for anyone that was already in the system for the Z-mount. And whatever size sacrifice they would have had to make, I really do think it would have been worth it. The Z-mount as a system is really just starting out, so with native dedicated lenses in APS-C, you've only got those two kit lenses, and the full frame lenses are not super cheap. Now they're definitely cheaper than some of the other options and other mounts. You just have to consider that if you want to go full native. Now let's go over the things I really do like about the camera. Compared to something like the Z6, this uses SD cards. Super convenient format. You can find SD cards anywhere, any store. I do think the camera is a joy to use from a photographer standpoint. It's got a good layout, nice ergonomics, nice large grip to it. So using the camera as a photography camera, I really did enjoy that. You got some of the features like the U1, U2, you have a minimum shutter speed feature. Definitely has a lot to it with the interface, the design, how it works, that using it as a photo camera, I think it's one of the best out there for APS-C mirrorless right now. While the viewfinder is the same megapixels as the M5, I think the viewfinder in the Z6 is better in every way. It feels larger, it comes out from the camera more, so it's more convenient to use. I really do like the viewfinder on the Z50. Video output on the Z50 seems very nice. You have a lot of options with it, the 4K stuff, that nice high frames per second. The autofocus felt quick, felt prompt, had no issues there. They did put a nice amount of customization and even features like autofocus adjust, which I assume is related to their f-mount lenses. Definitely a good amount of customization, good amount of features in the camera. The Z-mount itself feels like the most future-proof of all of the mounts out there if you are interested in that. A nice large diameter with a short registration distance means you can adapt pretty much anything to the Z-mount. It will be interesting to see how the Z-mount itself develops, especially now that the Z50 is there with the APS-C. That was a look at the Z50. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, thanks to Cameracraft in Rockford, Illinois for letting me try this camera out at their shop. Scott Photography Bonsai. If you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing. That helps me out a lot. Likes and shares help out a lot as well. Thanks again.